Now I just opening the YouTube for Season of Creation there. It takes a few seconds and then I will start the webinar. Okay. But I ask you just to please wait for my sign because it takes a few seconds for people to actually start seeing what's going on screen. Okay, we're starting the webinar now. Okay.
Hello, everybody, and welcome on behalf of the Season of Creation to this high-level webinar entitled The Role of Faith Actors and Governments in Ensuring a Just Energy Transition and Mitigating Climate Change through a Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. As you know, our theme this year with Season of Creation is to hope and act with creation. And thank you so much for joining us today, those of us joining on our live stream and those here in the Zoom room. I am Cookie and I work with Russia International. I just want to give a few notices before we move on. Those of us who are joining here on Zoom, there is French and Spanish interpretation available. So please do click on the relevant boxes so that you can get interpretation in your preferred language. Our moderator for today will be Ashley Ketisia from LSM. But we will start our gathering in this webinar with prayer. And I'm now going to introduce Bishop Professor Dr. Heinrich Bedford Strom, who is the moderator of the Central Committee of the World Council of Churches, to start this webinar with prayer.
Thank you, Cookie. Let's pray. God, creator of heaven and earth, we thank you and praise you for your beautiful work of creation, for the warm spring sun, for the refreshing and abundant summer rain, for the beautifully colored autumn leaves, for the first morning look outside the window after the snowfall of a winter night. Open our eyes for the beauty of your creation. We bring before you our lament on the destruction of natural environments that we see, the continuing and increasing loss of biodiversity, melting glaciers, rising ocean temperatures, increasingly frequent weather extremes, and so many other signs of global warming. Fogs of dirt in metropolis on this globe. We ask you to give us the inner courage to look at our part in causing these human-made ecological catastrophes and to repent. We pray that you may fill our hearts with a spirit of renewal of our lifestyles, so we discover in our daily lives how less can be more. We ask you to grant us decisiveness and wisdom so we fight for the necessary societal and political changes. God, give us strength so we persist in our struggle. Give us love so we do not become harsh and bitter. Give us joy so we celebrate the beauty of your creation and all the blessings we receive from you. Give us hope so we trust that seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. And for this meeting now give us wisdom and curiosity and many new insights. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, you are the source of all being. We praise your holy name. Amen.
Thank you for that beautiful opening prayer, Bishop Heinrich.
You're welcome.
Now, it is my honor to introduce our first speaker, Foday Bangura from Sierra Leone, who is a resident in Kigali, Rwanda, where he has been studying at the Africa Leadership University. He has known for 7 years of dedication as a child's rights advocate, during which he had several positions from within Sierra Leone's Children's Forum Network, including National Vice President. His contributions include being the lead child author of the Children's Declaration Appeal to New Global Financing Pact in Paris, and he was also part of the organizing committee for the first ever child-led Global Children's Climate Summit and the Africa Children's Summit. Foday has been affectionately nicknamed the child that knows it all, and he is now involved with the World Council of Churches. He serves both as a champion and a consultant for intergenerational climate justice. Foday will be speaking to us about why we have the current state of the climate crisis, why we are off track in addressing the key issues, especially in the context of continued production and use of fossil fuels. Foday, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ashley. I mean, the wonderful introduction made me feel as if I've already made my remarks. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Greetings to you all, from esteemed religious leaders to distinguished speakers, and of course, our honorable guest for joining us today on this session. It is my humble honor to be speaking for my generation of young people, because that is why I'm here, and it's my generation that I'm representing. As Ashley said, I'll be speaking about the impact of climate change, and of course, how I see the need for the COP to change course, because I see some off-trackness towards the COP event. So Ashley, next slide. Thank you. So as I said about the impact of climate change and how extensive and multifaceted it is, and how it is affecting various aspects of our lives, and it does it through things like extreme weather events. I know these are issues we all faced. Maybe it depends on where you are from. For me, from Africa, for example, there is extreme heat, because we know Africa is having a hot weather, but because of the climate crisis, it has rising, and of course, it is beyond what it's normally supposed to be. Because just a month ago, we had a report in South Africa wherein the weather went to up to 40 degrees, which is like which is not supposed to happen. I mean, there are reports that people, even in South Africa, we are fainting publicly. And of course, we've also seen rising sea levels in the glaciers, and how the melt of the ice caps, and how this is contributing, of course, towards how the sea level is rising, and this is contributing towards extreme flooding in several countries around the world. And we also know that because of the climate crisis, we are experiencing a lot of biodiversity loss, and this has been happening because there has been a lot of destruction in terms of habitat, and how this is changing, of course, the conditions to leading to some species getting extinct, and this is obviously disrupting our normal and routine ecosystem that we know. And of course, this also has been an issue with the agriculture. There is so much desertification right now, and a lot of countries are facing drought, and crops are being destroyed. So why do I think COP is off track? So I think one of the things is that, one, there are inadequate commitments. Of course, many countries at COP do pledges, so many things in terms of technology transfer to developing, especially developed countries to developing countries, in terms of course, finance, and a lot of other, in terms of even technicality. But over the years, we've been seeing that some of these commitments fall short because some countries are not able to probably adhere to their commitment, or whatever they committed, they give less or support less based on what they committed at COP. And then we also see that there is a lot of lack of enforcement. And I mean, because I believe that if countries are committing towards making sure that to supporting developing countries, then there should be enforcement mechanisms to make sure these countries adhere to their commitments and make sure they give the support as they pledged during COPs. And as I said, I just mentioned this, which is the financial and technological support, which a lot of countries, especially developing countries, need to make sure they meet all of their climate targets and to make sure that they are able to fight the climate crisis. And then I also think there is a lot of political and economic interest. I also think that countries are going to COPs based on their political and economic interests. That is to say, it's not in service of the needs of the people of the planet, or neither to protect the planet itself, but rather of their own national and political interests to gain, whether it's fame or to gain more connection between the political realm, and to do a lot of things that are basically focused on their own ambitions. Next slide. So these are basically statistics that shows that the production of fossil fuel and in its investment is actually increasing instead of decreasing, based on all of the commitments that have been made, or based on all of the hard work that leaders have been taking, that is advocates and all other forms of religious leaders and all, to reduce or decrease fossil fuel. So it says here, global oil production as of 2023, the production approximately was 92 million barrels per day of fossil fuel. And that was close to pre-pandemic level, which indicates that there is still strong ongoing production and use. Then another says that investment in fossil fuel, despite the growth in renewable energy investment, fossil fuel investment remains substantial. For instance, global spending on fossil fuel reached slightly over $1 trillion in 2023. That is around 15% to coal, and the rest was on oil and gas. This shows that there is continuous investment in the fossil fuel sector. And then coal consumption. According to the International Energy Agency, they reported that global coal consumption increased by about 2% in 2023, and reflecting on the continuous reliance on this fossil fuel, despite there is a lot of effort to transition into cleaner energy sources. Gas demand, which of course natural gas demand has been on the rise, with the International Energy Agency also saying that they predicted that 2% increase in natural gas consumption in 2024 compared to the previous year. And there is a lot of carbon emission, of course, CO2, which has also increased to around 6.6 billion tons in 2022, which is close to pre-pandemic level, showing persistent high level of emissions associated with fossil fuel use. Next slide, Ashley. So with my previous statement, with all of these things that have been said, I did not say them to actually teach, but I of course I know there are a lot of experts in this call, and there are a lot of people with so much experience than me. So I was just reminding all of us of what we are doing, what is currently happening, and what we want to see happening. So to finalize my statement, I wrote a letter, and I call this letter a letter for my future. And this letter is written to humanity. By this, I mean everyone in this call, everyone outside this call, everyone viewing it from the live stream, or everyone that has not seen this call yet, or that has not been able to get access to this information yet. So let me read this letter for you all. It states, letter to humanity, a letter for my future. I said, dear everyone, I hope my message finds you in great health and prosperity. My name is Foday Bangura. I was born and raised in the Republic of Sierra Leone in West Africa. My country is one of the least developing countries, LDCs, as least developing countries are called. And it's also one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world, according to CVF report. My country, over the last 34 years, experienced several issues that have kept its development not progressive. And they include our 11-year civil war, the Ebola epidemic, floods, mudslide, the coronavirus, etc. I stated the issues to portray to world leaders, that is political, religious, traditional leaders, etc., elders and fellow young people, that as a young person from the global south, who have experienced firsthand the dire effects of the climate crisis, and in a country that does not have the financial and technological resources to respond to the crisis, which exposes myself and others to more vulnerability. Ashley, next slide. I acknowledge and appreciate the efforts and progress that has been made since 1992 by world leaders, climate experts, including scientists and advocates, etc. But I also want to remind us all that there is still more that needs to be done for us to meet the Paris Agreement greenhouse gases emissions 1.5 degrees target. There is substantive evidence. The scientific facts are clear, and I urge you all to take action as the future of my generation and planet is at risk. Today, I am appealing to the world that we need to take faster and sustainable actions for the just transition to achieve a livable planet. I also want to urge parents, guardians, and everyone else to bank responsibly by making sure your money is not used to expand fossil fuel projects. Climate responsible banking is an easier, more reliable, and an efficient way to reduce emissions. I thank you all for your time. With regards, Foday Bangura. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Foday, for the wonderful and beautiful introduction into why the continued production and use of fossil fuels is connecting to the climate crisis, and all the powerful insights, including the beautiful letter to all of us and to appealing to various world leaders. Minister, Honorable Dr. Mai Natalia, thank you so much for sharing Colombia's progress. It is an honor to welcome you, Dr. Mai Natalia, Minister of Home Affairs, Climate Change and Environment of Tuvalu. As a leader of a small island developing state that is on the front lines of the climate crisis, Dr. Talia has been steadfast advocate of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. He will share the journey of how Tuvalu championed the treaty and why they remain committed to it, driven by a deep concern for the people's future. Dr. Talia, you're welcome.
Thank you so very much, organizer, for making this very important dialogue possible. It's 1 a.m. here in Tuvalu. And before I proceed on, may I kindly ask whether you can hear me well before I proceed?
Yes, we can. Please proceed.
Thank you. Colleagues and friends, Dalofa from Tuvalu. Allow me at the outset to acknowledge the invitation extended to me to make few remarks on this very important topic for Tuvalu and the rest of the world. Tuvalu, as you already know, a small island nation in the Pacific Ocean, has emerged as a critical voice in the global movement for climate justice, particularly through its advocacy for a Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. This treaty aims to phase out fossil fuel production and promote a fair transition to renewable energy sources. Tuvalu's leadership in this initiative is not only merely a political stance, but a desperate call for survival, driven by the immediate and essential threats posed by climate change-related sea level rise. As one of the nations most affected by climate change, Tuvalu faces challenges, including rising sea levels, increased frequency of extreme weather events that challenges our very survival. These challenges are not abstract future scenarios. They are currently realities that jeopardize the very existence of Tuvalu as a sovereign nation. The urgency of this situation has propelled Tuvalu into a leadership role in the international climate dialogue, particularly as the impacts of fossil fuel consumption become increasingly apparent. In 2019, during the UN Climate Action Summit, Tuvalu's Prime Minister articulated the need for a Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. This movement marked a significant turning point as it highlighted the critical link between fossil fuel production and the devastating impacts of climate change. By advocating for a non-proliferation treaty, Tuvalu calls for global commitment to curtail fossil fuels extractions and use, thereby addressing the root cause of climate change that threatens the very existence of our people. Tuvalu's motivation for championing the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty stems from several interconnected factors. The existential threat, the immediate threat posed by climate change, is a significant motivator. Rising sea levels means that Tuvalu could be disappeared. For Tuvaluans, the fight against fossil fuel is not just about environmental policy. It is about the preserving of their homes, culture, and way of life, and of course, their spirituality. This existential threat provides a powerful impetus for actions and advocacy, as the stakes could not be higher. Moral responsibility. Tuvalu leadership is also driven by a sense of moral responsibility. As a nation that contributes almost next to nothing to greenhouse gases emissions, Tuvalu recognizes its role in advocating for those disproportionately affected by climate change. By calling for the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, Tuvalu seeks to amplify the voices of vulnerable communities worldwide, emphasizing that climate change actions must prioritize the needs of those on the front lines. International solidarity. Tuvalu's advocacy is rooted in the belief that climate change is a global problem, requiring collective actions. By leading the charge for the FFNPT, Tuvalu aims to foster international solidarity, urging other nations, especially major fossil fuel producers, to commit to reducing their reliance on fossil fuels. This call for unity is essential for creating a comprehensive and effective response to the climate crisis. Influence policy change. Tuvalu understands that policy change at the global level is essential for meaningful progress. By advocating for FFNPT, Tuvalu aims to influence international climate negotiations and push for legally binding commitments to phase out fossil fuels. This strategic approach reflects Tuvalu's recognition that change is often achieved through persistent advocacy and collaboration with like-minded nations. Hope for future generations. At the heart of Tuvalu motivation is a commitment to future generations. By advocating for sustainable and equitable energy transition, Tuvalu aims to ensure that its children and grandchildren inherit a habitable planet. This long-term vision fuels Tuvalu's dedication to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, as it represents a pathway towards a more just and sustainable future. And to conclude, Tuvalu's leadership in the call for Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is a profound testament to the resilience and determination of small island nations facing the immediate threats of climate change. Through its advocacy, Tuvalu not only seeks to protect its own citizens, but also stand as a beacon of hope and a model for global actions against fossil fuel dependency. The motivations behind Tuvalu's leadership, rooted in existential necessity, moral responsibility, international solidarity, and a vision for a future, underscore the critical importance of collective actions in addressing one of the most pressing challenges of our time. As the world grapples with climate crisis, Tuvalu's call for the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty serves as a critical reminder that the fight against fossil fuels is not simply an environmental issue. It is a fight for justice, equity, and the survival of vulnerable communities worldwide. The pathway and the forward requirements of collaboration, commitment, and shared recognition that the future of our planet depends on choices we make today. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Dr. Maina, for the various impactful information that you have given to us today and the years of international climate advocacy that you have had, that you have brought into your leadership, and also for being at the forefront in terms of leading Tuvalu and the Pacific's global commitment to advocate for ambitious and continue to championing the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. I appreciate you and your very wonderful inputs. Now, I am excited to introduce Zipporah Berman. Zipporah is the chair of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, and she has had over 20 years experience in climate campaigning, and she will be discussing more about the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty and its purpose, how far it has come, and also what we can do about it. She is a BA, MES, LED, and has been designing various advocacy campaigns. She is a friend of the Season of Creation Committee. And also recently, she was awarded the Climate Breakthrough Award of $2 million to develop a bold new climate strategy. And she has also given various TED Talks and just presenting also on the very beautiful and urgent need for us to phase out fossil fuels. Zipporah, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with all of you, and thank you so much, Minister Maina. It's always wonderful to hear you speak about the treaty. Working with the South Pacific Islands, with Tuvalu and Vanuatu and others, has been such an incredible learning experience for me. I want to. Can you see my screen? Good.
Yeah.
I think it's important when we are talking about these issues to start really at the beginning. I talk about it in some of my writing as staring into the sun. We need to really look at what we're facing, to remind ourselves, and to be able to remind others. Because for some reason, climate is one of those intransigent problems where it's hard to hold on to how much we're experiencing around the world and what the challenge is. We look at it and then we look away. And our job, I think, in part, is to hold that, is to hold it every day and think about what we're going to do every day in order to support, especially those who are experiencing the worst of climate impacts right now around the planet. This year has been the hottest in human history. Every day we break records that break records. And fires, of course, and heat waves have been sweeping across our planet. I think it's important to take a step back and look at why. So the graph that I'm showing you here shows us what trajectory we're on for emissions. So we're currently on a trajectory to reach 4.1 to 4.8 degrees by 2100. And those are just numbers, but what do they really mean? Well, so far on the planet, we've warmed a little more than 1 degree. We know as a result of that, our oceans are 30% more acidic. We know that there are fires sweeping the planet, that 250,000 people in Europe alone will die of premature heat this year. We also know that under current policies, we're set to be about 3.1 to 3.7 degrees. If you look at just pledges made under the Paris Agreement, we're set to hit 2.6 to 3.2. At over 2 degrees, large swaths of the planet become uninhabitable. So how is this possible that we know this, that we know how much carbon is trapped in our atmosphere, and we know that we're going to be experiencing such increases in temperature and extreme weather and not acting? In part, it's because for decades, we haven't been facing the source of the problem. I was able to spend a little bit of time this year in Lahaina in Hawaii with indigenous leaders there who are working to rebuild the city and the town. And they told us stories of fire erupting out of nowhere, of having to run down their street and jump into the ocean while they watched their town burn. And this is happening now in many places around the world. I think we have to hold the people of Lahaina and many other places in the world in our hearts as we think about what we're going to do today, because every ton of carbon right now matters. Every ton of carbon that we allow to get trapped in the atmosphere matters. Because at all of these international negotiations and even around our own dinner tables, we may argue about what needs to be done, how we can phase out fossil fuels. But the core of this problem is that 86% of the carbon that's trapped in our atmosphere comes from three things. It comes from oil, gas, and coal. Yet for decades, we've been talking about climate change and not even talking about fossil fuels. We have, in fact, the United Nations Production Gap Report already shows us that we have 110% more fossil fuels planned to be produced, on track to be produced right now by 2030 than we can ever burn and stay below a 2-degree pathway. In fact, we already have enough oil, gas, and coal on the surface of the planet or under construction to take us past 1.5 degrees and close to 2. So despite that, we're still developing trillions of dollars of oil and gas and coal, and new projects are being announced every day. Decision makers tell us that it's okay because renewable energy is skyrocketing. It's now cheaper around the world, and it's being built at a tremendous scale. And that's important and incredible. But the atmosphere doesn't care how many solar panels we create. The atmosphere cares how many fossil fuels we don't. 10 years ago, 80% of the energy used on this planet was from fossil fuels. Today, 80% of the energy used on this planet is from fossil fuels. And that's not because we're not building renewable energy, but it's because we're not displacing, decommissioning, and stopping the expansion of fossil fuels. When I first started this work many years ago, I was horrified to realize that the Paris Agreement didn't even mention fossil fuels. This isn't a mistake. It's because the fossil fuel industry has spent decades infiltrating negotiations, trying to ensure that their products remain invisible, that that climate policy focuses on emissions and driving down pollution, but not constraining the production of their products. But what we build today, it will be what we use tomorrow. So we're at a moment in history where we need a companion to the Paris Agreement. We need to do everything we can to show our elected officials that they have the support that they need to make the hard changes, to stand up against the fossil fuel industry, and that there will be consequences if they don't. Yet in the past couple of years, we've seen fossil fuel subsidies rise and not decrease. That's the direct funds that governments around the world are giving to the oil and gas industry to keep them alive at this moment in history, even though renewable energy is cheaper and safer at scale and available for almost every use that we use fossil fuels for. So how is this possible? In part because a lot of people thought that if we simply constrained emissions, that if renewables got cheaper, if the price of carbon went up, then the market would constrain the supply of fossil fuels. But it's not working because the market is being distorted by trillions of dollars in fossil fuel subsidies. If we don't constrain the production of fossil fuels, it makes the inevitable transition harder. It creates stranded assets and financial turmoil. It increases risks to workers. It delays renewable energy expansion. And of course, the most dangerous is it risks warming well above 1.5 degrees Celsius. This work on the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty was inspired by the Pacific Island nations who first considered the world's first treaty to ban fossil fuels back in 2016. Building on their work, academics and lawyers and diplomats started talking about and creating the idea of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. And of course, the governments of Tuvalu and Vanuatu were the first to endorse the treaty. The idea of the treaty is that it would have three pillars: a just transition pillar, agreements between countries to support each other in ensuring the transition; a non-proliferation treaty, every country agreeing to no new expansion of fossil fuels; and a fast and fair phase out. Again, global governments and international cooperation to make sure that countries have the support that they need to phase out production. All countries are not equal in these issues. There are many countries, of course, that are drilling for more oil, like Ecuador, just to feed their debt. Some countries are more dependent on the production of fossil fuels, and they're going to move to decreasing the amount of fossil fuels they produce and export. They're going to have economic support, trade agreements, and tax agreements to make sure that their economies don't collapse. And then there are the wealthy countries where the majority of the oil and gas development is planned in the next 5 years: the US, Canada, the UK, Norway, Australia. These countries must act first and fastest. We proposed the idea of the Fossil Fuel Treaty about 4 years ago. The first people to come on board were Nobel laureates. 101 Nobel laureates endorsed the idea of the Fossil Fuel Treaty, including the Dalai Lama. And next was the faith community. Thank you to all of you who have worked so hard to build support for the Fossil Fuel Treaty in your communities, in your churches, in your synagogues. We now have 420 faith institutions in over 55 countries that have called for the Fossil Fuel Treaty, and the organizing of the faith community is the bedrock of this work. People need to be encouraged to use their voices. We need more faith institutions, more individuals, more cities, more celebrities, more artists. We need to create a drumbeat that will drown out the sound and the lobby of the fossil fuel industry. We need to ensure that our countries know that this is a step we want and need them to take, and they're starting to hear. The European Parliament has now endorsed the Fossil Fuels Treaty. The state of California, one of the largest economies in the world and a producer of oil and gas, has now endorsed at the Senate and the House the Fossil Fuel Treaty. The World Health Organization became our first UN body to endorse the Fossil Fuel Treaty. In fact, around the world, we now have thousands of civil society organizations, over 105 cities from Calcutta to Vancouver and beyond. This is actually out of date, almost 1 million individuals now have endorsed the treaty, and it's growing every day. Over 800 individual elected parliamentarians from around the world, over 3,000 scientists, and now banks and businesses are starting to endorse the treaty. This movement is growing. Organizations that support and are working on the Fossil Fuel Treaty now span across 117 countries. And in order to support you all, the Treaty Secretariat support team is developing research and ideas of what could be under the treaty and delivering that to the ministers and the countries of now 13 countries who have endorsed the Fossil Fuel Treaty, with more by the end of the year. Most recently, at Dubai, Colombia joined the treaty. Colombia is the 6th largest exporter of coal, and when President Petro stood on the stage, he said, "We know that every day we make the problem worse, but we're here to endorse and work towards a fossil fuel treaty because we cannot stop on our own. We need new international cooperation between countries because every ton of carbon matters." He talked about it as an issue of life and death, and it is. Sometimes these issues can seem overwhelming. Some people say this is a really big, bold idea and it's too big. What we know right now at this moment in history is we can't afford more of the same. We have to be bold. We have to have big ideas. We have to work together because we can make the changes that we need to make. You know, when I first started doing this work, we didn't have internet. I ran my first campaigns by fax machine. We didn't even have cell phones. And now the world has entirely changed in my lifetime, and I'm not that old. The world is changing. We are on the cusp of transforming the world. We are imagining a new industrial society that isn't built on death, that doesn't threaten where one country's progress and one individual's progress doesn't threaten the health and livelihoods of another. This is the moment where we will remake industrial society, and we have to all lean in because it's definitely possible, but not without joining together to do this work. Thank you so much for coming this morning, for all of your work around the world. Together, we will see a fossil fuel treaty.
Thank you, Zephyra, for your leadership and passion, and for sharing the treaty as one of the most critical solutions for the climate crisis. We will learn more about how to endorse the treaty and promote it during the season of creation later on. But now I am delighted to introduce Reverend Rachel Mash of the Green Anglicans. She is the environmental coordinator and based in South Africa. She has been mobilizing the Anglican Communion on how to support the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. She will share the journey of how the Communion came to sign the treaty and tips for those who are seeking to rally their communities around the world for this very important cause. Welcome, Reverend Rachel.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you, Sephora, for that inspiring message. Yes, as Ashley says, I'm the coordinator of the Anglican Communion Environmental Network, and I'm co-chair of the Season of Creation Ecumenical Steering Committee, coordinator of the Green Anglican Movement, and a member of the UNEP Faith for Earth task team. Thank you. You can go back to the full screen. So the Anglican Communion, which is the Anglican Global Church, has signed up on the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. So I want to tell you a bit about how this came about. So I'm the environmental coordinator for the Anglican Church in Southern Africa. And 3 of our countries were being badly impacted by the fossil fuel companies. In Namibia, at the end of 2020, the Bishop of Namibia, Luke Pato, woke up to the news that a Canadian oil company called Recon Africa had been given rights to explore 35,000 square kilometers in the Kavango region, and exploratory drilling had already begun. This was devastating because of the potential contamination of water reaching the Okavango Delta. That is a UNESCO protected ecosystem and wildlife sanctuary, and one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. There was also the threat of the impact on the lives of indigenous people living in the area, in one of the driest parts of Africa. So how did the church respond? We organized a petition to go to the Namibian consulate in Cape Town and got bishops from across Africa and Canada to sign up. 34 bishops and 3 archbishops signed the petition. Protests were organized at the cathedral, and newspapers had headlines like "Bishops call Kavango Basin drilling a sin." The second story was taking place in South Africa. In 2021, Shell decided that they would conduct seismic surveys off the Wild Coast in a very biodiverse and ecologically sensitive area. The area is known for its rich marine life. It is a migratory route for whales and an important fish spawning ground. Now, seismic blasting involves using air guns to send powerful sound waves through the ocean to map the seabed for oil and gas deposits. And these sound waves can be incredibly painful to marine life, particularly whales and dolphins and other sea creatures that depend on echolocation. The noise from seismic blasting disrupts their navigation, their mating, and their feeding patterns. The church joined an unprecedented wave of opposition from environmental groups, local communities, indigenous people, fishing communities. Several NGOs banded together and won a court case based on the impact to marine life, the impact on local communities, and the spiritual significance of the Wild Coast. We were dealing with a third case in Cabo Delgado in northern Mozambique. It is one of the poorest regions on the planet, where people survive by fishing and with smallholder farms. Total started a massive gas project, which led to the displacement of local communities forced off their lands and away from their fishing areas. Unable to earn an income, many young men joined the terrorist organization called Al-Shabaab to fight back. Attacks started on oil workers, but spread to government officials such as teachers. Then began a wave of terror where people were beheaded and their headless corpses left for family members to be found. People fled in terror, with over 500,000 leaving their homes, leading to a humanitarian disaster. The Bishop of Nampula, Bishop Ernesto Manuel, spoke about the situation to the BBC, and it was broadcast during COP. As a non-political figure, he was able to bring the voice of the community to the world. Because of situations like this and so many across Africa, the Anglican Church of Southern Africa passed a resolution to say no to new oil and gas projects. When we heard about the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, we thought, yes, this is something that gives us hope for the future. And so we brought a resolution to the Global Anglican Church at the Anglican Consultative Council, which was passed unanimously. I want you, as people of faith, to support the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. There are still over 400 what we call carbon bomb projects, which are in the pipeline. These are projects that can exceed 1 gigaton of carbon dioxide in their lifetime. They can be stopped. The Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty calls for a halt on new projects. Read about it. Educate your church. Educate your school. Educate your place of work. Speak to your politicians or your city, your nation, get them to sign up. Get your money out of banks that support fossil fuel projects. These are not only climate change bombs. They destroy the environment, pollute water supplies, and trample on human rights. The profits of these projects are shifted overseas. The environmental degradation, the human rights abuses remain at home. This is the season of creation, and our theme for the season is hope and act with creation. And so I want to end with a wonderful quote from St. Augustine, who said this: "Hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain as they are. Let us be angry at what the fossil fuel companies are doing to this wonderful planet, at the environmental destruction and the human rights abuses. Let us be angry, but let us be people of hope and have courage to act and embrace the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Rachel, with your cross-cutting practical advice on how we can endorse the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, how we can take advocacy in our local communities, and also using our faith-based approach as a strength to be able to move key actors towards contributing to a fossil-free future. We're very, very grateful for their remarks. Next, we will hear a special video from the Catholic Church featuring voices from Latin America and Asia Pacific, sharing their reflections on the moral imperative for supporting a fossil-free future. Let's watch the video.
CELAM, Consejo Episcopal Latinoamericano.
Queridos hermanos y hermanas, les saludo desde el Consejo Episcopal Latinoamericano y Caribeño, el CELAM, como secretario general de esta organización. En este tiempo de creación, renovemos el espíritu como animadores del mensaje de Laudato Si y sembremos semillas de esperanza. Les invito a divulgar la campaña del Tratado de No Proliferación de Combustibles Fósiles. El Papa Francisco respaldó tan claramente en la exhortación Laudate Deum para impulsar una transición energética justa, sostenible e integral que supere el paradigma tecnoeconómico, que respete la dignidad humana y cuide toda la biodiversidad de nuestros ecosistemas. Queridos hermanos, caminemos juntos en sinodalidad con la alegría del Evangelio. Que el Señor les bendiga. En el nombre del Padre, y del Hijo, y del Espíritu Santo. Amén.
www.celam.org.
My dear friends, I am here as the chairperson of the Office of Human Development and Climate Change of the Federation of Asian Bishops' Conference. A few days ago, I participated in a webinar organized by the Laudato Si movement. I'm here to show support for the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. We all realize the dangers of climate change. We have experienced the effects of climate change. We are aware of the various efforts being put to prevent this rise in temperature. This is another step which is very important, the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. The Paris Agreement doesn't mention fossil fuels. The COP27 outcome didn't mention oil and gas. So I think it's time that we all join hands together to show our solidarity in trying to persuade governments and other important people who are responsible for this climate change, for this climate emergency. We need governments to join a bloc of Pacific nations spearheaded by Vanuatu and Tuvalu in developing a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. Health, safety, and security is what the world needs, and it's possible to get there, but it requires ending the area of coal, oil, and gas. So I would like to request all of you to join this bloc of Pacific nations in their call for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty to complement the Paris Agreement by accelerating an equitable shift away from fossil fuels to affordable, abundant, clean energy for all. It is a fact that today a few governments have promised to have this fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. But we require also the business people. We also require communities. We want people who influence the policies and the decision making in our countries. So I would like to tell you that the Federation of Asian Bishops Conference is with you, and we are trying our best and will try our best to have this fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty in the next COP meeting. I wish you all success, and I'm with you, and the FABC is with you.
Next, I'd like to introduce you to Ambassador Ruleta Camacho Thomas. She is the Ambassador for Environmental Affairs of Antigua and Barbuda. Ambassador Thomas will speak to the specific threats that climate change poses to small island developing states, including the impacts on coral reefs and marine life in the Caribbean, and why Antigua and Barbuda endorse the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. She will also highlight the critical provisions that should be included in a binding international treaty to protect vulnerable nations. Ambassador Thomas, we are eager to hear your perspective.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, honorable ministers and distinguished colleagues. I bring you warm greetings from the Honorable Sir Malwing Joseph, who is the Minister of Health, Wellness and the Environment of Antigua and Barbuda. As a small island nation on the forefront of climate change, Antigua and Barbuda have endorsed the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty because we face an urgent climate crisis, one that threatens not just our way of life, but our very existence. Some of the reasons is sea temperatures in Antigua and Barbuda have reached alarming levels. The temperatures are affecting our marine ecosystems and our livelihoods. In Antigua, we have measured temperatures on average of 86 degrees Fahrenheit. This is 30 degrees Celsius. These are not just numbers. They signal a looming catastrophe for our biodiversity, our economy, and our communities. Fossil fuels account for about 90% of global CO2 emissions and are driving this crisis. This is not speculation, this is a fact. And we cannot afford to delay action any longer. You know, there are also moral and equity grounds why we support this treaty. As a small island nation, Antigua and Barbuda contribute less than 1% of the world's emissions. Yet we are disproportionately impacted by rising sea level, storms, coral bleaching, and endorsing the treaty aligns with our moral responsibility to seek climate justice. This is not just about equity, it's about ensuring that those who contribute least are not the ones responsible for paying the highest price. Antigua and Barbuda also underscores that there's a broader issue here with respect to the representation of vulnerable countries at the forefront of discussions about addressing global climate issues. We have always been a leading voice on these issues, and this treaty offers a platform to make sure that our needs are prioritized and addressed. I want to speak a little bit about the role of faith and religious communities in small islands like Antigua and Barbuda, particularly in the Caribbean. It's not just our governments that should be leading this call for responsible climate action. Antigua and Barbuda, like many other Caribbean societies, the population follows the guidance of our clergy and our religious leaders. And therefore, faith-based organizations hold a significant influence over our communities, and they guide the moral and spiritual compass of our people. The church therefore plays a critical role in promoting environmental stewardship and reminding us that caring for the earth is a reflection of our values as stewards of God's creation. Faith actors alongside government efforts must work together to encourage responsible climate action, including advocating for policies such as a non-proliferation treaty that will protect our most vulnerable and preserve our environment for future generations. This is a partnership that is essential for driving a collaborative response and a collective response to the climate crisis. What we would like to see in the treaty, we'd like to see equity and justice. The treaty must prioritize countries, small island developing states, in terms of access to finance and technology, and must support mechanisms that are essential if we are to transition to renewable energy and build climate resilience. Debt relief mechanisms are very important. We have very high levels of national debt, and that prevents many of our vulnerable nations from investing the way we would like to invest in climate adaptation. Provisions such as debt for nature swaps, climate resilient debt clauses must be part of the treaty. These mechanisms will provide us with the fiscal space that we need in order to build sustainable green infrastructure. Funding and international cooperation is pivotal. A binding treaty should ensure that finance flows to the vulnerable nations through innovative solutions such as stimuluses. Reform of the multilateral development banks is also important. If we can have access to this funding, we are better able to diversify our economies and move more quickly away from fossil fuel dependency towards green and sustainable development, and also to allow our communities and our private sector to get on the right path. Some of the threats of climate change, specifically on coral reefs. I spoke about rising sea temperatures already, but what that results in is the loss of our marine resources. Many of our small islands, Antigua, is highly dependent on fisheries and tourism, both of which are impacted by loss of marine resources. Sustaining these economic sectors is crucial for our economies as is. And as the impact that we feel from climate change intensify, these ecosystems are being increasingly put under threat, and pushing our already vulnerable economies closer to collapse. Ecosystem and food security is an issue with respect to coral reefs. We are heavily dependent on our marine resources. In the Caribbean, we are facing a reliance on imported foods, and our local fisheries are struggling to survive with the impacts of climate change. We saw after Hurricane Beryl, which was a history-making Category 5 hurricane that passed through the Grenadines on the 1st of July, the earliest Category 5 hurricane through the Caribbean on record. People didn't have food in the Grenadine Islands. So when we have impacts, there are real threats to our survival. This is not just words, these are instantaneous threats to our survival. And even if we build food security mechanisms by looking towards agriculture, one storm can wipe out all our security mechanisms. And therefore, just adaptation alone will not help us. We really have to do something about fossil fuels, and we have to do it urgently. The Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is not just a moral imperative. It is a necessity for our survival. The treaty must protect us, who are the most vulnerable. It must offer pathways to economic resilience and foster international cooperation to mitigate catastrophic events of climate change. Faith actors and religious leaders are crucial partners in this journey, encouraging responsible stewardship of our environment. Together, we must all advocate for bold climate policies that safeguard our shared future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for the great remarks and for reminding us of the imperative to have a just transition that is favorable to all countries, which includes reforming the global financial architecture and also to ensure that there is justice as we advocate for a treaty and a principles that is all-inclusive, and also for the role of faith actors in promoting this very good work. I'd now like to introduce the bishop, the auxiliary bishop of the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Kisangani region, Monsignor Leonard Njadi Njate. And he will be speaking to us about how the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty aligns with the mission of the Church of Africa, and especially the perspective on justice and peace. He will address how the exploitation of mineral and natural resources continues to fuel conflict and suffering in the Great Lakes region, and how the treaty can help mitigate these injustices. Monsignor, welcome.
Merci beaucoup, Ashley, pour la parole accordée et pour l'invitation à cet échange sur le traité de non-prolifération des combustibles fossiles. Je voudrais avant tout dire que le traité de non-prolifération des combustibles est avant tout une exigence éthique. Une exigence éthique qui répond au bien de l'homme, de l'humanité, et devant les multiples dangers qui pèsent sur la santé humaine, mais aussi sur le bien-être et l'épanouissement de l'homme, il est moralement honnête de prendre clairement position contre toute prolifération des énergies combustibles. Nous ne pouvons pas rester inactifs ni indifférents devant les dangers qui nous menacent, qui menacent la santé humaine et qui menacent l'épanouissement de l'humanité. Deuxièmement, le traité de non-prolifération est une question de responsabilité des gouvernements. les gouvernements sont appelés à ratifier les traités et s'engager à doter les pays économiquement faibles de moyens conséquents pour leur permettre d'opérer une transition vers les énergies renouvelables. Mais cet effort doit être endogène, c'est-à-dire voulu, mené par les gouvernements à l'interne et en même temps exogène, c'est-à-dire avec le concours de toute la communauté internationale. Et c'est ici que je voudrais placer le rôle que les leaders religieux sont appelés à jouer. Le premier rôle est celui d'annoncer l'évangile de la création, comme le pape François nous le demande dans l'encyclique Laudato Si au numéro 62. Annoncer l'évangile de la création avec un appel fort à l'écologie intégrale et spécialement à la conversion des mentalités, des attitudes et des actions. Le pape François, dans l'encyclique Laudato Si, nous demande d'adopter une nouvelle manière de vivre et à l'intérieur de cette manière de vivre, faire des choix vers des énergies renouvelables. C'est là pour protéger notre maison commune. La deuxième attitude des leaders religieux consiste à dénoncer les dégâts, les abus commis contre la maison commune, notamment dans l'exploitation sauvage des ressources naturelles, mais aussi des ressources minières. Cette situation triste et malheureuse alimente aujourd'hui, surtout en Afrique, mais aussi dans d'autres pays du monde, des foyers de conflits armés, des foyers de tensions. Au Congo, nous venons de célébrer le 2 août dernier la deuxième édition des Génocaustes, c'est-à-dire la commémoration des victimes des guerres pour des raisons économiques, spécialement dans la partie est de notre pays qui a causé 12 millions de morts, plus de 5 millions de déplacés internes, sans compter de maisons qui sont saccagées, brûlées, les traumatismes et les blessures psychologiques qu'entraînent ces désastres. Le nombre de femmes qui sont violées est innommable. Les enfants qui sont restés orphelins, dont l'avenir est sacrifié, sont très nombreux. Les sentiments de rancœur que cela peut générer dans les cœurs des victimes et de leurs familles. Et donc, les leaders religieux, nous sommes appelés à nous unir, à former une seule voix pour dénoncer avec la plus grande fermeté tous ces abus-là contre notre maison commune, mais aussi contre l'homme. Ce n'est pas seulement des abus contre les ressources naturelles, contre des ressources minières, mais aussi contre l'homme, contre les humains, comme nous sommes en train d'assister à ce qui se passe à l'est du Congo. Et cela sans qu'on puisse en parler au niveau international. Le troisième rôle que peut jouer les leaders religieux est celui de renoncer eux-mêmes à l'usage progressif, renoncer progressivement à l'usage des combustibles fossiles. C'est ce témoignage qui portera plus loin la parole que nous annonçons, les combats que nous menons pour un monde écologiquement sain. Nous sommes donc invités comme leaders religieux nous-mêmes à adopter des attitudes et des gestes verts pour que nous puissions donner l'exemple, donner un témoignage afin d'entraîner le peuple de Dieu vers cette conversion dont parle le pape François dans l'encyclique Laudato Si. Pour conclure, je dirais, nous avons urgemment besoin de ce traité qui doit recueillir un large consensus pour mettre fin à l'expansion de nouveaux projets liés au charbon, au pétrole et au gaz, et de gérer une transition mondiale vers l'abandon des combustibles fossiles pour protéger les populations de la menace que les combustibles fossiles font peser sur elles, sur notre santé, sur l'avenir. Il nous faut donc soutenir les nations qui négocient un traité de non-prolifération des combustibles fossiles. Le traité proposé pourra être une feuille de route mondiale nécessaire pour mettre fin à l'expansion des combustibles fossiles et gérer l'élimination progressive du charbon, du pétrole et du gaz. Que le Seigneur bénisse les efforts en faveur de ce projet. Je vous remercie de votre aimable attention.
Thank you very much, Bishop Leonard, for the great and powerful reflection. Now we have time for the Q&A session, and we would love to hear from you. Please feel free to submit your questions in the chat. For those on YouTube, please utilize the chat function. And for our Spanish and French listeners on Zoom, please utilize the Q&A feature. We will be monitoring the questions as they come in. First question goes to Zipporah. If you're still with us.
I am.
The Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty represents a bold vision for addressing the climate crisis. But what are the key obstacles that you foresee in gaining widespread international support for the treaty, especially from major fossil fuel dependent nations? And also, how can faith leaders help overcome these obstacles?
Thank you. It's a great question. What I've discovered in studying 5 other treaties is that there are different models for designing a treaty. So one model, which we see in the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, is that all countries come together and negotiate a treaty by consensus. Other models that we see in the Landmines Treaty or the Chemical Weapons Ban, even the Montreal Protocol on ozone, is that you have a smaller group of countries that have very high ambition, and they're kind of first movers. So those countries start developing a treaty, and then it's a build it and they will come model. This is more the model that we're pursuing now, because if you create a system where it's all of the countries have to come together, you'll have the problem that you identified in your question. These big producers, US, Saudi Arabia, who don't want to constrain their production and might weaken and slow down the development of the treaty. So we often say in the work on the treaty that the journey matters, by some countries coming out and showing leadership, starting to develop the new agreements and trade rules and debt relief rules and tax agreements that would be under a treaty. That will start to inspire and create a grouping that other countries will join and start to shift the social norm. We have to make it so that approving a new fossil fuel project, whether you're in the treaty or not, is something that is simply not acceptable in debate and in foreign policy. So that's the model that we're starting to use, and we have 13 countries. We believe at the point that we have countries from every region of the world, so looking towards more about 20 to 30 countries, then we can start actually negotiating and forming a treaty. I think the biggest obstacle right now is countries feeling like they're not going to be decision makers, politicians feeling like they're not going to be attacked within their own country if they take the step to say that they need to constrain fossil fuels. We've all grown up with the idea of fossil fuels meaning prosperity. And certainly the industry likes to reinforce that to make people scared that if fossil fuels are constrained, that they won't be able to heat their homes or move around the world. And we need to break that cycle of dependence and ensure that politicians feel like they're supported to make the decision. I've literally had prime ministers and presidents say to me, "Can you do more public events in my country so that when I announce it, I'm responding to something that people support?" And that's why this organizing is so incredibly important.
Thank you so much. And the next question is for Reverend Rachel. Faith communities have a unique moral authority in advocating for climate justice. And what are some of the most effective faith-based organizations and ways that faith-based organizations can pressure governments and industries to commit to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty and also to transition to renewable energy?
So I think one of the biggest strengths of the faith communities is that we are local and global. So we have got reach into the smallest rural communities. And you find like most of the areas which are most impacted by fossil fuel projects are in the rural areas. They're far away from the major cities. The environmental degradation is being done. The human rights are being abused, and it's far away. So our job is to tell those stories. And if the stories are being told by a faith leader, then they actually come with moral standing. If you get somebody telling a story of what's happening in the north of the country or whatever, and it's a politician, then often people will say, oh, it's a political thing. But a faith leader can stand up and tell the story of what is happening in their community that they serve, how their people are being trampled underfoot, how their water is being polluted, how those environmental degradation is taking place, how climate change is impacting on their country. So I think the storytelling is really important. So I think one of the problems and the reason that it's been difficult for us to shift with the UNFCCC process is it's very numbers based, and we need the stories because that's going to shift. And then also we need to use our international connectivity. You know, for instance, the story, just an example, Mozambique has got a strong relationship with the Diocese of London. So the stories that were coming out of Mozambique helped the Diocese of London when they were pushing for divesting from fossil fuels. So I think it's the same. We can use our international links. And people in California can tell the stories of what their brothers and sisters are facing in Malawi and bring those international stories. So use our local connectivity for storytelling and then bring them to the places of power. And I think the second thing is that religious leaders, particularly in the African context, still have got a seat at the table with the politicians. So the religious leader can open the door for they may not have all the knowledge that they know about the treaty and the different things, but the religious leader can open the door by setting up a meeting with the Minister of the Environment or the Minister of Energy, and then getting the climate activists and the people who have the more knowledge about the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty into that meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Rachel. And we also thank our very wonderful audience for sending in so many engaging questions that will spark up the conversation during the season, as this is not the last interaction that we will have. I will now hand over to Kuki Rohum of Arocha International, who will take us through next steps and also guide us on how we can continue to engage in the discourse about the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, but also take action during this season of creation. Welcome, Kuki.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And we have heard so much about the problem, the challenges that this world and the rest of God's world, the rest of God's creation is facing because of the crisis that is in our faces right now. We have heard of the tragedies that people and the rest of God's creatures are facing because of what is happening in this world. And we have also heard of possible solutions. Now we can sit back and relax and say, oh, well, this is really scary and I don't know what to do. But the thing is, all of us can do something. We can be involved. And if we are truly concerned about this, we must take action. And it just takes a few people to take this action. You know, Jesus and his 12 disciples changed the world. And so we as a faith community, wherever we are and whatever we believe in, can bring change, as we've been encouraged right now. And so how might we take action? We would encourage you to visit the Season of Creation resource page, because you might say, well, I want to take action, but I don't know what to do. Well, you don't need to look further. You can just visit our website, as now shown on the screen, and look at the various websites that are there. You can learn more about what the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is. What does it mean? Just Google or go onto our website to find out more about what this treaty is and how it can bring change and how you might want to sign up for it. You can also be involved in advocacy. And as Season of Creation, we have created advocacy guidelines, which includes talking points, advocacy prayers, slides, frequently asked questions, and YouTube videos as well. So all these resources are there for you to use. You can sign up for yourself and encourage others to sign up to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty as well, not just as individuals, but maybe as your community, as your church, even at the leaders, political level, leadership. You can ask people to sign up for this. We would also encourage you to take action specifically on 21st September. That is the date that we have set up for us all to take action. So join with us in taking this action, because it matters. You may feel you're small, you're insignificant, but if all of us do the best we can wherever we are, we can make a difference. So on this day, we would encourage you to just take action where you are and whatever you can do. Organize a gathering, a meeting, talk about it, sign petitions. You can encourage people to sign those petitions. And all these ideas are there, as I've said, on the Season of Creation website. All these templates are ready for you to use. So we just encourage you to join with us in making a difference, so that those who are affected the most, particularly those who contribute the least but are worst impacted, will be able to thank you for the actions that you have taken. So this brings us to the end of our gathering today, of our webinar today. I would like to thank all of you for joining us, for those who are watching this on live stream, and those of us who are here in the Zoom room. I would also like to thank all the people who have spoken. Thank you for sharing your experience, your insight, and your wisdom with all of us. And we pray that you wouldn't stop your connection with us, and that you'll continue to keep connected with us as we do more activities and as we continue to celebrate. As Ashley said, this is not the end. We're just beginning to celebrate the Season of Creation. So continue to stay tuned in with what we are doing. We would like to end today's webinar with a lament, a song of lament from Archbishop Peter Lloyd Chong, a climate lament. And this is a song from the Pacific Island. So as we lament, may we also be challenged to take action. God bless you all, and thank you for joining us.
sister, brother, the island children are groaning as climate change destroys our home. The poor are crying. Stop the CO2 emissions. Mother Earth is crying. Stop burning the coal. Island people, raise your cries for the world to hear. Island victims united we rise to save our the poor are crying. We can't protect our home. Mother Earth is crying. Let's save our Papa State, the children are hungry as the fish are dying. Ratu ni benua, the land waves as money rapes. None on earth, the poor are crying. Stop the mining. Our earth is crying. Stop the logging.
This is our reality, people of the ocean. We gotta rise to stop the violation against creation. We see our reality, Mother Earth is crying. Destruction is real. We can no longer watch from the sidelines. We're holding our voices. We've gotta rise to protect our home. The poor are crying. Our Mother Earth is crying. Stop the logging, stop the mining. We've gotta protect our home.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Goodbye, Bishop Heinrich.
It was a great seminar. Thank you so much for everyone who prepared this. It was really very impressive. And I must say, I have never seen an archbishop sing such a great song and such a great rap. So that was great at the end. I think I should try that too.
I think you should. I think the moderator of the World Council of Churches needs an outfit like that.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Well done.
Bye.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Monseigneur. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Ashley, for putting it all together. Well done. Thank you, Marcelo, for all your hard work.
Thank you to the interpreters, Olivier,
Merci à tout le
Vincent,
monde.
Pamela. Merci.
Merci de l'organisation. Tout s'est bien passé.
Merci
Ciao.
beaucoup. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Ciao.